Hello, Gus.
Hi there.
Good.
How
It's
are
been a
you?
while. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Just all set for my move back to the UK,
Oh, you're
actually.
leaving Spain.
Yeah, unfortunately, heading back to London now on Saturday.
Okay. Is it family issues or?
No, no, no. It's I don't. I've got a young son, so heading back home is a good idea. But also as well, London's the FX centre of the world, so it's a good place to
Okay.
be.
So you're happy about it because you said unfortunately. So you're gonna you're gonna be
Well,
missing the lifestyle in Barcelona.
exactly. It's a fantastic place to live over here. So there's many pros
Well,
and
you
cons.
know, if it's meant to be, you'll be back. One decision leads to another, Gus.
Exactly, and I think they're going to have to try very hard to keep me away
Yeah.
during the summer. I think if I can have my summer months over here, I'll be a very happy
Well, it's
bunny.
great to talk to you again. There was a recent IRS ruling regarding Bitcoin. I know absolutely nothing
Yes,
about Bitcoin, so if you could edify me and the community what your thoughts are, the viability of it, do you think it has a future?
I think Bitcoin is one of the most fascinating subjects at the moment, and I don't think it's necessarily because of the rapid price appreciation or the volatility. I think it's what it represents, and I think what the story with the IRS really hits to the body of it. I think Bitcoin is one of the main forces behind Bitcoin is the libertarian movement. So you have a lot of people becoming skeptical of like a typical monetary policy, fiat currency, quantitative easing, and this has been a response by the crypto community. And I think the IRS disclosure recently, it follows on from an event which happened November last year, which I think it didn't get enough press. I think it was the most definitive thing that's happened in Bitcoin's history, and it's been largely
What was
ignored.
it? What was it?
It was the U.S. Senate committee meeting which classified Bitcoin as legitimate,
Okay.
and this happened, and this really sparked the massive price appreciation from around 100 to 1,150
Hmm.
ish. And one of the key things in that was the people which hosted the meeting was Homeland Security, the Criminal Division of the U.S. Attorney General's Office, the U.S. Secret Service Criminal Investigative Division, Financial Crimes Enforcement, and so it gives the impression that there's going to be. It's not. It was more than just a financial assessment. They were looking at the full spectrum of Bitcoin and digital currencies, and this IRS disclosure as well. Um, I think it's a bit. I think in the larger picture, this is going to be a definitive moment for digital currencies. I don't think it's by any means the end or the beginning of the end. I think it's just the latest turn in what's been going on.
Okay, and the
A few,
IRS ruling was to tax it as property instead of
yeah,
as currency.
yeah. It's not counted as property. It's not counted as currency. It's property, which means that capital gains will
Okay.
apply. Every transaction is taxable, and users will have to calculate the P&L on every transaction. Everything is retroactive as well, so there's no clean slate. So if you've been involved in Bitcoin from the beginning, you're going to have to go back and for your tax returns and
Oh,
calculate
so they're
everything.
even doing a
And this,
clawback on people that were there from the onset.
yes, and this reminds me a little bit of the situation that the Swiss banks find themselves in after the deal with the US authorities over their US clients. Because now Swiss banks, they've got the burden of guilt over them, and they have to retrospectively go back and prove that even the US client they had in 1970 was not doing tax evasion. So this, I mean, for Bitcoin in the short term, this could be very interesting. And if you look at the technicals as well, it's indicating a move lower might be on its way. But I think the bigger question is Bitcoin, maybe digitals. I think digitals have a future, but we're just going to see a constant evolution.
Well, I forgot who I was talking to. I talked to so many people, Gus, but I brought up Bitcoin, and what was fascinating to me is that it's real, and the U.S. government eventually will embrace it
Hmm.
because that's where they want to go anyway. They want to go cashless. more
I
control over
completely agree.
digital currency than having a cash economy.
I think that this is one of the. I have a lot of time for the concept of digital currency and Bitcoin, but I think this might be one of the most heart aching moments where people that are pushed to build this libertarian kind of movement might see their product used
Yeah,
against them. Whereas I think there's a bigger chance of seeing a digital dollar before widespread use of Bitcoin. And if we were to delve over to the more outlandish kind of interpretations, you could say that all the press that Bitcoin gets is more about training the public to be used to the concept of a digital cashless society. You've had Larry Summers talking about how a cashless economy could prevent a bank run in the future. So the signs are there that there is that in mind, and also as well you have the tax issue as well. So you've got the IRS coming out and saying that every transaction can be clawed back from the
yeah.
past. If you have Bitcoin, if we have the cashless society, everything can be clawed back. There's no opportunity for tax evasion out there. And I'm not saying tax evasion is something we should aspire to, but when you think about libertarianism, you think about personal
Right.
freedom and self-determination to an extent, and it's infringing on that
Right.
area
And
there.
so it is ironic. Something that was created for financial freedom is going to be
Hmm.
embraced for draconian control. Okay.
Potentially, I think there are a lot more twists in the story to come, and I think we'll see the evolution of other
Yeah,
currencies,
you
perhaps.
mentioned something like a virtual dollar, so you think that could be on the drawing board to compete with Bitcoin, but go in the same direction?
I think if let's say the states around the world, they start to dominate the area, then we'll see digital versions of the current currencies. But at the same time, you have to appreciate what the pioneers of Bitcoin have created, and they're not stupid people. So there could be other currencies to come out and compete. You've got Litecoin, you've got Dogecoin, there's others. So I think there's a lot more twists in this story to come. I think even Warren Buffett said it's far too early to draw any conclusions
You
on
ever
this
hear of
story.
a bull and bear coin? Oh,
No, I
well,
haven't actually.
I worked for a commodity company who offered a bull and bear coin. You toss it up in the air, and if it comes up
Hmm.
bull or bear, it tells you which way to trade.
Sounds like a very brave approach.
So, God, we're moving into this brave new world. When I hear this type of talk, cashless, a lot of the financial freedoms, bail-ins, clawbacks. It makes me think that
Hmm.
Huxley and Orwell were visionaries.
Or maybe they were on the inside track. Who knows? Yeah, it does seem to be going that way, but at the same time, you have to look at the positives, and that something like Bitcoin has been developed and has risen to this stage. And just because there is a challenge to its autonomy,
Yes.
doesn't mean that we should just fold and head down the Orwellian route. Then it shows that there are people out there on the cutting edge of innovation, and they are thinking with a libertarian mind. So we have to keep faith that those principles will
Well,
prevail.
I don't see anything like that taking place until there would be some type of great reset, don't you think? A great reset meaning the failure of the fractional banking reserve system or some.
Well, I think every time we have a catch up in these rooms, we keep on pushing further along the road where you have. I think instability or insecurity is becoming institutionalized to an extent now. Everyone is just used to there being a debacle in some part of the world. I think now they're talking about the Chinese banking
Yes.
crisis is under pressure because no one's going to the Chinese banks to actually borrow money because companies like Alibaba, they're raising capital directly. So it's everything that we
Yes.
knew is coming under
Yeah. So
question.
a lot of things
And
are beginning to manifest that were back. They were background stories, and now they're happening in real time.
exactly,
What about what's
it's an
happening real
exciting time.
time in the Ukraine, Gus? Putin has a lot of troops massed on the border.
Mhm.
I've heard that he's going to go in to take more territory, so he has a land bridge to his naval base. And
Yeah.
how did you feel, and did you hear the same thing that was reported to me? Obama in Brussels saying that he fears a nuke going off in New York City more than he worries about the Russians.
I haven't heard that
Okay,
quote,
well,
but I think
that was reported on a website that he said that, and for sure he said he's not worried about Russia. So that makes me worried.
if actually last time we had the chat on here, we spoke about
Yeah.
Syria. I think that I think there's a few options of what's going on here, and I think Syria plays a part
Are
in
you
it as
okay?
well.
But
I think
let me
if you,
stop you because I've been tweeting, and I did once he went into
uh
Ukraine, that I thought that the U.S. may give the green light to its proxies to project power into Syria, and Israel has
mhm.
had some airstrikes there. And then when Turkey took out that Syrian jet, to me, Turkey equals NATO. Is that where you're going?
Yeah,
That the Ukrainian situation is
I
metastasizing
think
in
it,
Syria?
I think it goes a little bit further than that, but I think what you say is completely true as well. And also, Turkey, if Turkey is actually the rightful owner of Crimea now, because if you date back a few hundred years, there's a treaty in place that if Crimea declares independence, it automatically becomes
Was
Turkish
that
territory.
because it was
But
part
that
of the Ottoman Empire?
Exactly, and there was a treaty in place, but obviously we don't expect that to be respected. It's
Mm.
very old. But just jumping back to Syria, I think if you look in, I think 2009, 2008, 2009, there was real pressure on there to be a natural gas line from Qatar
Hmm.
through Syria into Turkey to supply Europe. And now Russia supplies most of Europe with gas going through the Ukraine. And also now the US is talking about becoming the biggest, and they're talking about the US in a few years being the biggest supplier of oil and gas
Yeah.
in the world. And now the US are talking about opening supplies to supply Europe so we're not dependent on Russia.
That'll take
So
five.
I
That'll
think in
take
many,
5 years.
potentially, yeah. But we also you've got Norway as well, who've got excess supply. There's and they're even talking about in Ukraine there's potential gas as well. So I think everything that you see, it's not just the case of okay, well we need to protect natural speaking Russians. I think also when you look at these power moves which are happening behind the scene, the Russian economy as well is very geared towards
Yes.
commodities. And it's not that since Putin's been in power, yes, maybe Russia is stronger and it's got more natural self-confidence, but the economy is not modernized away from being just a commodity currency, a commodity
Right.
economy. So when you have these power moves, which are there to destabilize the foundations of their economic stability, then you can understand their movements maybe in a
Yeah, because
different
Putin
light.
would love to see 140 oil. Is that what you're saying? So
Yeah.
that things could heat up in Syria to drive that. What do you think about the fact that the way Obama has responded in Syria, the way that we basically, there's no military option to stop this annexation or this move
Mm-hmm.
towards Putin's czarist reign to reestablish the Soviet Union. What do you think Israel's thinking? Because Netanyahu had a timeline where Iran was going to cross a threshold that red
Mm-hmm.
line was crossed months and months and months ago.
I think Israel is going to start to feel increasingly isolated with the way things are going. Um, and that in itself creates instability in the region because I think one thing that history has shown is that Israel, they don't mess
Yeah.
about. So if they feel threatened, they will go and do the business themselves. But I think they prefer to be in a situation where they have their partners there to protect them. At the same time, without wanting to sound too prejudiced to the Israeli position as well, they do overstep the line in many occasions
Yeah.
as well. So it's a volatile situation. And I think actually, you mentioned Obama and his response. I think actually, if we go back to kind of heading back into the Bitcoin kind of area when we talk about libertarianism, personal freedoms, I think when this is one of the situations where the fallout from the NSA revelations is really starting to show how much that has undermined the world economy, because you've got Snowden in Russia, who's a political pawn. You've got the European nations who probably would have stood closer with the US, maybe in this situation. They know that the US has been spying on their leaders.
You have a great point.
And I mean, you could have had a much more stronger force if there wasn't that distrust which has been built in. And even on a technological level, in the US historically, they had been the gatekeepers to internet freedom. And now you're starting to see countries like Russia, China, Brazil. They're starting their own networks because they feel compromised. So maybe I think people in a few years are going to look back on the Obama administration very differently to how they see it now. Once the cult of personalities.
Yeah, I mean, I've read reports and opinions that Putin was emboldened by the information he got from Snowden.
I hadn't heard that, but it would make sense. It would make sense. I mean, it'd be crazy to think that he's not over there and he's not talking.
Yeah, over a bottle of vodka. I'd like to ask you what you think about what China might be thinking about watching Russia. With their close ties to the Ukrainian territory historically, annexing it, and China looking at Taiwan.
Well, I think what's really interesting is when people talk about the new Cold War, one thing which people never really appreciated was the relationship between China and Russia during the Cold War. Because although they were both, or Russia, the Soviet Union, because although they were communists, there wasn't that.
They were adversarial.
Exactly. And now you have China with its complex financial relationship with the US, and it's looking at Russia with Crimea. And you've got, well, you mentioned Taiwan. I was thinking more Tibet.
Okay.
And this annexation, it opens a can of worms because there's many disputed regions around the world. And right now, people have been following the law, the international courts, their judgments. And this has trampled all over them. So what's to say that in the contested Tibet region or the more Muslim areas in China or in Taiwan, people don't just start to kick up and say, well, actually, no, we don't want this. We're going to fight back, or we're going to launch our own vote of independence. Right. I think China are a lot more in line with the US than people actually realize. And China might start to put more pressure in some respects. I think also as well, people talk a lot about the relationship between China and Russia starting to trade in yuan and Russia declaring that China's a global currency. I think the bigger relationships with China and the US, and China will be watching Russia with trepidation at the moment, not as a personal threat, but setting precedents around the world.
Interesting. Great conversation, Gus. Was a pleasure speaking to you. You want to wrap it with anything? What's the big surprise? We just changed seasons. We're in the spring. A lot of things have happened in the spring, the so-called Arab Spring. What are you looking for over the next quarter into the summer? That may be a major news event unfolding right before our eyes.
I think what we'll probably start to see is lots of native Russian-speaking groups in Eastern European countries, ex-Soviet countries. I think they'll be sponsored maybe by the Russian state to start to demand more rights. Russian to be taught in school to these children, and that will start to cause a bit of instability in all the countries.
Yeah, that's a NATO threat.
That's potentially that could be there, and then we might start to see something interesting. Ultimately, I think that this is a little bit stage managed. There's reports that Putin is maybe the richest man in the world with roughly around $50 to $200 billion tucked away in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. So when you start to see these things about sanctions and the guys who are getting sanctioned, treating them as badges of honors, I kind of think that, if they wanted to really hurt the decision makers, they know where to go and find the people who matter. So I don't think we're going to have all that war. I think we could head into a kind of Cold War situation at worst. I don't think we're going to see any big out conflicts anymore. I think the world is too localized for that.
And perhaps if there is any type of military action, it's through the proxies rather than the major players.
Yep, I think we're in a proxy world now in terms of conflict.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Gus. Safe travels on your way back to your homeland. And don't give up the dream. You could be a rich, retired guy with your family sitting on the beach in Spain before you know it, buddy.
That's the
All
plan,
right.
eh? That's the plan.
From my lips to you know who's ears. Okay. All right,
Indeed.
Chuck. I mean, see you,
Pleasure as
Gus.
always.
Bye.
Ta-da. Bye.